The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as Catherine stood by the tall windows of their private quarters. Her fingers traced the cool glass while she watched William in the courtyard below, speaking quietly with his security team. The weight of the coming separation pressed heavily on her heart, though she tried to maintain the composed exterior that royal life demanded. William had received the call 3 days earlier. A humanitarian crisis in a distant Commonwealth nation required immediate royal attention, and as second in line to the throne, his presence was not just requested, but necessary. The trip would take him away for 6 weeks, the longest they had been apart since their wedding day. Catherine remembered how his face had changed when he hung up the phone. The usual warmth in his blue eyes had been replaced by a mix of duty and reluctance. He had turned to her, his hands reaching for hers, and simply said, "I have to go, Kate. They need me there." She had nodded, understanding immediately. This was the life they had chosen, the responsibility that came with their position. The past few days had been a whirlwind of preparations. Briefing sessions, medical checks, security arrangements, and endless meetings filled William's schedule. Catherine had watched him transform from her loving husband into the focused, dutiful prince the world expected him to be. Yet in the quiet moments between his obligations, she caught glimpses of the man who worried about leaving his family behind. Their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, had taken the news differently. George, being the eldest, understood the importance of his father's work but couldn't hide his disappointment about missing their planned fishing trip. Charlotte had simply hugged William tighter during their bedtime stories, as if she could keep him home through sheer will. Little Louis, too young to fully grasp the situation, had asked repeatedly when Daddy would be back, each question tugging at both parents' hearts. Catherine had spent extra time with each child, helping them understand why their father's work sometimes took him far away. She explained how important it was for people in their position to help others when they were in trouble, just like how they would want someone to help them if they needed it. The children had listened with the remarkable resilience that had always amazed her. The household staff moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for William's departure, while maintaining the normal routines that kept the family grounded. Mrs. Henderson, their longtime housekeeper, had noticed Catherine's attempts to stay busy and had gently suggested she take some time for herself. But Catherine found comfort in the familiar tasks, in maintaining the rhythm of their daily life even as everything was about to change. William's mother had called the evening before, offering words of encouragement and sharing her own experiences of separation during royal duties. The Queen had also reached out, expressing her gratitude for William's willingness to serve and her understanding of the sacrifice the family was making. These conversations had reminded Catherine that their situation, while difficult, was part of a larger legacy of service. The media had caught wind of the upcoming trip, and Catherine knew that every moment of their farewell would be scrutinized. Photographers would be looking for signs of distress, reporters would analyze their body language, and the public would form opinions about their personal moment of goodbye. This added pressure made the already difficult situation feel even more overwhelming. Despite all the challenges, Catherine felt an overwhelming pride in her husband. She had watched him prepare for this mission, with the same dedication he brought to everything he cared about. He had studied the situation thoroughly, learned about the local customs and challenges, and approached the responsibility with genuine compassion. This was the man she had fallen in love with, someone who truly cared about making a difference. As she continued to watch him in the courtyard, William looked up, and their eyes met through the window. Even from a distance, she could see the love and regret in his expression. He raised his hand in a small wave, and she responded with a gentle smile, trying to convey her support and understanding. In that moment, despite all the protocol and public attention surrounding their lives, they were simply a husband and wife facing a difficult goodbye. The breakfast table that morning felt different than usual. While the children chattered about their school plans and weekend activities, Catherine and William exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Every mundane conversation felt precious. Every shared smile carried extra weight. William helped Louis with his cereal, probably for the last time in many weeks, while Catherine memorized the sound of his laughter echoing through their dining room. After the children left for school, the house fell into an unusual quiet. William's luggage stood packed and ready by the entrance, a stark reminder of the approaching departure. Catherine found herself walking past the suitcases several times, each glimpse reinforcing the reality she was trying not to think about. They had decided to spend the morning together, away from phones and meetings and the endless stream of people who needed William's attention. They walked through their private garden, the same paths they had strolled during their courtship years ago. The autumn air was crisp and Catherine pulled her cardigan closer as William reached for her hand. "Do you remember when we first walked here?" William asked, his voice soft with memory. Catherine nodded, recalling that nervous young woman who had been so overwhelmed by the grandeur of royal life. Now, years later, this place felt like home, and the man beside her had become not just her husband but her anchor in a world that could feel impossibly complex. They talked about practical things at first: William's schedule for the trip, the events Catherine would handle alone, arrangements for the children's activities. But gradually their conversation shifted to more personal concerns. William worried about missing Charlotte's school play and Louis's first attempts at riding his bicycle without training wheels. Catherine assured him that she would record everything, that they would share these moments even across the distance. The weight of royal duty had always been present in their relationship, but never more keenly felt than in moments like these. Catherine remembered their engagement interview, when they had spoken so optimistically about balancing public service with private happiness. The reality had proven more challenging than either had anticipated, requiring constant negotiation between their roles as public figures and their desires as a family. William stopped walking and turned to face her fully. The formal composure he maintained in public had completely fallen away, leaving only the vulnerability of a man who hated leaving his family behind. "I keep thinking about all the little moments I'll miss," he said. Louis learning new words, Charlotte's questions about everything, George's stories from school. "These weeks feel like they'll stretch on forever." Catherine reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "We'll call every day," she promised. "And I'll send you pictures and videos of everything. You won't miss as much as you think." Even as she said the words, she knew that digital connections could never replace physical presence, but she was determined to make the separation as bearable as possible. They sat on their favorite bench, overlooking the rose garden that Catherine had helped redesign shortly after their marriage. The flowers were past their prime now, but the garden still held the promise of spring's renewal. William talked about the communities he would visit, the people he hoped to help, the attention he could bring to their struggles. His passion for the work was evident, and Catherine felt both proud and heartbroken listening to him. The conversation turned to their own relationship, to how they had navigated previous separations and challenges. They had learned to communicate across distances, to maintain intimacy despite public scrutiny, to protect their private moments, even when the world was watching. These skills would be tested again, but they had confidence in the foundation they had built together. A palace aide appeared in the distance, a gentle reminder that their private time was coming to an end. William would need to review final briefings, make last-minute calls, and prepare for the journey ahead. Catherine squeezed his hand, signaling that she understood, that she was ready to share him with the world once again. As they walked back toward the palace, Catherine felt a familiar mix of emotions: pride in William's commitment to service, sadness about the coming separation, and determination to support him in every way possible. She had learned that being a royal spouse meant constantly balancing personal needs with public duty, and while it was never easy, she had found strength in the knowledge that their sacrifices served a greater purpose. The morning had given them what they needed most: unhurried time together, honest conversation about their fears and hopes, and the reassurance that their love could withstand another test of distance and duty. The afternoon brought a flurry of final preparations that made the morning's peaceful interlude feel like a distant memory. William's private secretary arrived with updated briefing documents, his security detail conducted last-minute checks, and the media liaison confirmed arrangements for departure coverage. Catherine watched from the sidelines as her husband transformed once again into his public role. She found herself paying attention to details she normally took for granted. The way William's brow furrowed when he concentrated on important documents, how he unconsciously straightened his shoulders when speaking with officials. the particular tone he used when discussing serious matters, different from his relaxed voice during family conversations. These observations felt important somehow, as if she were storing them up for the lonely weeks ahead. The children returned from school full of energy and questions about their father's trip. George had clearly been thinking about the situation all day and had prepared a list of things he wanted to know. Where exactly would Daddy be going? Would there be dangerous animals? Could they send him letters? William sat with each child individually, answering their questions with patience and age-appropriate honesty. Charlotte had drawn a picture during art class, a colorful family portrait that included an airplane in the corner. "So you can take us with you," she explained, presenting the drawing to her father. William's eyes welled up as he carefully folded the picture and promised to keep it with him throughout the trip. These innocent gestures from the children seemed to affect him more deeply than all the official preparations. Catherine helped the children make a small care package for William's journey. They included family photos, handwritten notes, Charlotte's drawing, and George's lucky marble. Louis contributed a small toy car, explaining that Daddy could play with it when he felt lonely. The simple act of putting together these items brought the family together in their shared concern for William's well-being. Dinner was a deliberately normal affair, with talk of school projects and weekend plans, but underneath the casual conversation, everyone seemed to be savoring the ordinariness of being together. William asked detailed questions about each child's upcoming activities, as if he were trying to be present for events he would miss. Catherine noticed how he listened more intently than usual, clearly wanting to remember these conversations. After the children went to bed, Catherine and William retreated to their private sitting room. The space felt different with his luggage nearby, already stamped and tagged for the journey. They sat together on the sofa, Catherine curled against William's side, both of them reluctant to acknowledge that this comfortable position would soon be just a memory. They talked about the logistics of staying in touch. Time zones would make spontaneous calls challenging, but they worked out a schedule that would allow for daily contact without disrupting the children's routines or William's official duties. Catherine would handle the upcoming charity events on her own, something she had done before but never for such an extended period. William expressed concern about leaving Catherine to manage everything alone, but she reminded him of her own strength and the support system they had built around their family. The household staff, their personal assistants, and family members would all help ensure that life continued smoothly in his absence. She had her own important work to focus on, projects that would help the time pass more quickly. As the evening wore on, they found themselves talking about hopes for the future, plans they wanted to make when William returned. These conversations felt like an investment in their reunion, promises to each other that this separation was temporary. They discussed a family vacation they had been considering, improvements to the children's play area, and Catherine's upcoming patronage events. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11, a sound that usually sent them toward bed, but tonight felt like an unwelcome reminder that morning would come too soon. William would need to rise early for final preparations before his afternoon departure. The knowledge that their time together was measured in hours rather than days created an urgency that made even comfortable silences feel precious. Catherine had prepared herself mentally for this evening, knowing that dwelling on the difficulty of goodbye would only make things harder for both of them. Instead, she focused on communicating her love and support, on reassuring William that his family would be strong in his absence, and on creating positive memories to sustain them both during the coming weeks. They eventually made their way upstairs, but sleep would not come easily. Tomorrow would bring the farewell they had been preparing for, the moment when duty would physically separate them once again. Dawn arrived too quickly, filtering through the curtains of their bedroom where Catherine had barely slept. She had spent most of the night listening to William's breathing, occasionally reaching out to touch his arm, reassuring herself that he was still there. When he stirred awake, their eyes met immediately, and without words they both acknowledged that the day they had been dreading had finally arrived. William's departure routine began early. A quick breakfast, final security briefings, and last-minute additions to his luggage. Catherine moved through her own morning preparations with deliberate normalcy, helping the children get ready for school and maintaining the cheerful demeanor that had become second nature during difficult times. But every mundane task felt weighted with significance. The children sensed the gravity of the day despite efforts to keep things light. George was unusually quiet during breakfast, while Charlotte stayed close to her father, holding his hand whenever possible. Louis, picking up on the subdued atmosphere, became more clingy than usual, asking repeatedly for one more hug from Daddy. Catherine had arranged for the children to go to school as usual, believing that maintaining their routine would be better than having them witness the emotional intensity of the actual goodbye. She and William had agreed that too much focus on the departure might make it harder for everyone involved. After breakfast, they each spent individual time with the children, sharing hugs and promises and reassurances. William knelt down to George's level, speaking to him seriously about being the man of the house while Daddy was away. George nodded solemnly, clearly taking this responsibility to heart. With Charlotte, William promised to call before her bedtime whenever possible, and they made a secret hand signal that she could use when she missed him. Little Louis received extra cuddles and a promise that Daddy would bring back a special surprise. After the children left for school, and strange quiet settled over the house. The official departure wasn't scheduled until mid-afternoon, but the preliminary goodbyes had already begun the emotional process of separation. Catherine found herself moving restlessly through rooms that suddenly felt too large and too empty. The morning brought a steady stream of visitors. William's private secretary arrived with final documents and itinerary updates. His physician conducted a last-minute health check and provided medications for the journey. The security team reviewed protocols one final time, and Palace communications staff confirmed arrangements for media coverage of the departure. Catherine observed these preparations with mixed feelings. The efficiency and professionalism of everyone involved was impressive, but it also highlighted how routine these separations had become for the institution of the monarchy. For the staff, this was simply another royal engagement, another successfully executed departure. For her, it was 6 weeks without her husband. Lunch was a quiet affair, just the two of them at the small table in their private dining room. They talked about practical matters. When William would call first, how Catherine would handle upcoming events, arrangements for the children's activities. But underneath these logistical conversations was an emotional current that neither wanted to address directly. William's hands were restless, constantly reaching for his phone to check messages, adjusting his watch, or simply fidgeting with whatever was nearby. Catherine recognized these nervous habits from other stressful occasions. Despite his calm exterior, he was struggling with the departure as much as she was. The afternoon brought heightened activity as the departure time approached. William's luggage was loaded into waiting vehicles, his security detail took their positions, and media representatives gathered at the designated coverage area. The machinery of a royal departure moved into motion with practiced precision. Catherine retreated to their bedroom to change into appropriate attire for the public farewell. She chose a dress in William's favorite shade of blue, a small gesture that only he would notice, but that felt important to her. As she prepared herself mentally for the cameras and scrutiny that would accompany their goodbye, she practiced the composed expression that royal life demanded. Standing before her mirror, Catherine saw not just the Duchess the public expected, but a wife preparing to say goodbye to her husband. The reflection showed her carefully applied makeup, her perfectly styled hair, and her appropriately chosen jewelry. But it also revealed the slight tension around her eyes and the way she held her shoulders, signs of the emotional struggle she was working to conceal. The time had come to join William for their public farewell, to transform their private anguish into a dignified display of duty and devotion that the world would witness and judge. The formal departure area had been transformed into a stage for their goodbye. Red carpet marked the path to the waiting aircraft. Security barriers kept the media at an appropriate distance, and palace staff stood ready to facilitate the ceremonial send-off. Catherine could see the photographers adjusting their equipment, preparing to capture every moment of their farewell for the world to see. William appeared in his formal travel attire, looking every inch the royal representative he was about to become. But when their eyes met across the space, Catherine saw past the official uniform to the man who would rather be staying home with his family. They moved toward each other with the careful choreography that years of public appearances had taught them. The walk to the aircraft felt both endless and far too short. With each step, Catherine was acutely aware of the cameras capturing their every expression. the reporters analyzing their body language, and the public who would scrutinize these images for signs of their true feelings. The pressure to appear supportive and dignified, even while her heart was breaking, required every ounce of her training and self-control. William's hand found hers as they walked, a gesture that was both natural and carefully calculated for the cameras. To the public, it would appear as a simple display of affection. For Catherine, it was an anchor in a moment that threatened to overwhelm her with emotion. She squeezed his fingers gently, communicating through touch what she couldn't express in words. They paused at the base of the aircraft steps, the designated spot for their public farewell. Palace protocol dictated the parameters of this goodbye, how long they could embrace, which gestures were appropriate, how to balance genuine emotion with royal dignity. Catherine had participated in similar scenes before, but never when the separation would last so long. William turned to face her fully, his hands reaching for both of hers. For a moment, the official nature of the departure fell away, and they were simply a husband and wife sharing a difficult goodbye. "Take care of yourself," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the aircraft engines. "And take care of our babies. I'll call as soon as I land." Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she spoke. Instead, she reached up to straighten his tie, a widely gesture that served the dual purpose of showing her care and giving her hands something to do. The familiar action grounded her in the moment and reminded her of countless other times she had performed this same task before public events. Their embrace was carefully timed and positioned for the cameras, but the emotion within it was entirely genuine. Catherine allowed herself to lean into William's strength one last time, to breathe in his familiar scent, to feel the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. She memorized these sensations, knowing they would have to sustain her through the lonely weeks ahead. When they separated, William's hands lingered on her face for just a moment, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. The gesture was so tender and instinctive that Catherine momentarily forgot about the watching world. In that instant, they existed only for each other, connected by a love that transcended duty and protocol. The final moments moved quickly. William kissed her forehead, whispered something private that the cameras couldn't capture, and then stepped back with the formal bearing that his role required. He turned to acknowledge the gathered officials, shook hands with his security team, and began his ascent up the aircraft steps. Halfway up, he paused and turned back, raising his hand in a final wave. Catherine responded with a smile that she hoped appeared confident and supportive, even as her heart felt like it was breaking. This image, William silhouetted against the aircraft door, Catherine standing alone on the tarmac below, would appear on front pages around the world, becoming the defining photograph of their separation. The aircraft door closed with a finality that echoed in Catherine's chest. She remained in position, watching as the engines powered up and the plane began to taxi toward the runway. Palace protocol required her to stay until the aircraft was airborne, to present an image of calm strength even as her husband disappeared into the sky. As the plane lifted off, Catherine finally allowed herself to acknowledge the full weight of what had just happened. William was gone, beginning a journey that would take him thousands of miles away from home and family. The next time she would see him in person, weeks would have passed, and their children would have grown and changed in ways both small and significant. Standing alone on the tarmac as the aircraft became a distant speck in the sky, Catherine embodied the complex nature of royal life, the constant balance between public duty and private emotion, the sacrifice of personal happiness for the greater good, and the strength required to maintain dignity even in moments of profound loss. The drive back to the palace felt surreal after the intensity of the public farewell. Catherine sat in the back of the official car, watching familiar landmarks pass by while processing the reality that William was no longer in the same country. The ceremonial nature of his departure had ended, but her personal journey of coping with his absence was just beginning. Returning to their private quarters, Catherine was struck by how quickly the space had been transformed by William's absence. His coffee cup still sat in the sink from breakfast, his reading glasses remained on the bedside table, and his pillow still held the indent from where he had slept. These small reminders of his presence made the house feel both comfortingly familiar and achingly empty. The children's return from school brought welcome distraction and energy back into the house. They had questions about the departure, Having seen some coverage on television at school, Catherine answered honestly but optimistically, emphasizing the important work their father was doing and the exciting stories he would have to share when he returned. George, trying to fulfill his role as the man of the house, offered to help with things that were usually William's responsibility. His earnest attempts to take on grown-up duties were both touching and heartbreaking. Catherine gently reminded him that he was still a child and that his job was simply to be himself, not to replace his father. Charlotte had been unusually quiet since coming home, and Catherine found her in her room, looking through a photo album of family pictures. "I miss Daddy already," Charlotte admitted, her small voice carrying a sadness that was difficult to hear. Catherine sat beside her daughter, holding her close while they looked at pictures together, sharing memories and talking about the next time they would all be together. Little Louis seemed less affected by the change, perhaps because his young age made it harder for him to understand the duration of the separation, but even he asked repeatedly when Daddy would be home, and Catherine could see him looking toward the door expectantly during their usual family time. The evening routine felt different without William's participation. He usually helped with baths, read bedtime stories, and participated in the gentle chaos of getting 3 children settled for the night. Catherine managed everything alone, but the children clearly noticed their father's absence. She tried to maintain the same energy and warmth that characterized their usual bedtime routine. After the children were asleep, Catherine finally had time to process her own emotions about the day. She walked through the house, turning off lights and checking doors, tasks that felt more significant when done alone. The responsibility of being the sole parent present, even temporarily, settled over her with its full weight. Her phone buzzed with a message from William, sent from the aircraft. He had landed safely and was about to begin the first phase of his journey. Reading his words brought both comfort and a fresh wave of missing him. She could picture him in the unfamiliar surroundings of his temporary accommodation, probably feeling as displaced as she felt at home. Catherine spent time responding to the message, carefully crafting words that would convey her love and support, without adding to any guilt he might feel about leaving. She shared updates about the children's evening, included a photo of them at dinner, and assured him that everything at home was running smoothly. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, but Catherine found herself reluctant to go to bed. Their bedroom would feel too large and too empty without William beside her. Instead, she curled up in the sitting room with a book, trying to establish new routines that would help her cope with the extended separation. She thought about other royal spouses who had faced similar challenges throughout history, women who had maintained households and raised children, while their husbands traveled on official duties. The knowledge that she was part of a long tradition of such sacrifices provided some comfort, even as it highlighted the unique difficulties of royal life. Before finally heading to bed, Catherine checked on each of the children one more time. George was sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed and innocent. Charlotte had fallen asleep clutching the stuffed animal William had given her, and Louis was sprawled across his bed in the careless way of very young children. Seeing them safe and content reinforced her determination to maintain stability and happiness in their home during William's absence. As she prepared for her first night alone, Catherine felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness about the separation, pride in William's dedication to his duties, determination to be strong for their children, and hope that the weeks ahead would pass quickly. The day of farewell was over, but the real challenge of managing the separation was just beginning. 6 weeks later, the same aircraft that had carried William away appeared in the sky above the palace, bringing with it the promise of reunion that Catherine had been counting down to for what felt like an eternity. The children had been talking about nothing else for days, their excitement building as the return date approached. Catherine felt her own anticipation mixed with nervous energy, wondering how it would feel to have William home again after so long apart. The formal arrival ceremony was smaller than the departure had been, but no less meaningful to the family waiting on the ground. Catherine stood with the children, all of them dressed in their best clothes, watching as the aircraft touched down and taxied toward them. George bounced on his toes with barely contained excitement. Charlotte gripped Catherine's hand tightly and Louis pointed at the plane, announcing to anyone who would listen that Daddy was inside. When the aircraft door opened and William appeared at the top of the steps, Catherine felt her breath catch. He looked tired from the long journey but healthy and whole, and his face lit up when he saw his family waiting below. The weeks of separation seemed to collapse in that moment, replaced by the overwhelming relief of seeing him safe and home. William's descent down the steps seemed to take forever, each movement bringing him closer to the reunion they had all been anticipating. When he reached the bottom, there was a brief moment of formal protocol as he greeted the officials present, but then his attention turned completely to his family. The children broke free from Catherine's gentle restraint and ran toward their father. The reunion was everything Catherine had imagined and more. William dropped to his knees to embrace all three children at once, his arms encircling them as they chattered excitedly about everything he had missed. George showed him a school project he had completed. Charlotte presented a new drawing she had made especially for his return, and Louis simply clung to his father, as if ensuring he wouldn't disappear again. When William finally stood and walked toward Catherine, the weeks of separation seemed to melt away. Their embrace was passionate and heartfelt, unguarded in a way that their public farewell couldn't be. Catherine buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent and feeling the solid reality of his presence after weeks of phone calls and video chats. "I missed you so much," William whispered against her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single day." Catherine felt tears she had been holding back for weeks finally spill over. Tears of relief and joy in the overwhelming happiness of having her family complete again. The drive back to their private quarters was filled with the children's excited chatter as they competed to tell William everything that had happened during his absence. Catherine watched from the front seat as William listened intently to each story, his attention completely focused on reconnecting with his children. She could see how much he had missed these ordinary moments of family life. Back home, everything felt different with William's presence filling the space again. The house came alive in a way it hadn't during his absence, as if his return had restored its natural rhythm. They spent the afternoon as a complete family, playing games, sharing meals, and simply enjoying being together again. That evening, after the children were asleep and they finally had private time together, Catherine and William talked long into the night. He shared stories from his trip, the people he had met, the communities he had visited, and the impact their work was already having. His passion for the mission was evident, and Catherine felt proud of the difference he had made during their time apart. They also talked about the separation itself, acknowledging how difficult it had been for both of them. William expressed guilt about missing so many daily moments with the children, while Catherine assured him that his work was important and that the family had managed well in his absence. They discussed what they had learned about themselves and their relationship during the weeks apart. The separation had tested their family in ways they hadn't expected, but it had also revealed their strength and resilience. The children had adapted to the temporary change in their family structure. Catherine had discovered new depths of her own capability as a single parent, and William had fulfilled his duties while maintaining his connection to home through daily communication. As they settled into bed together for the first time in 6 weeks, Catherine reflected on the journey they had all taken. The farewell that had seemed so heartbreaking weeks earlier had led to a reunion that felt even more precious because of the separation they had endured. Their love had not only survived the test of distance and time, but had been strengthened by it. The tender farewell that had stirred hearts across the world had concluded with an equally moving reunion, reminding everyone who witnessed it that true love endures, that duty and devotion can coexist, and that the strongest families are those who support each other through both separation and homecoming. William and Catherine had shown the world that even in the public eye, authentic emotion and genuine love could shine through, touching hearts and inspiring others facing their own challenges of distance and duty.